the Relationship Roundtable.
Because relationships matter.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Relationship Roundtable. Today, I have with me a very special guest, my ex-husband, 𝗲𝗲𝗄𝗃𝗃. Ranjan, thank you so much for joining me here.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
For sure. So, Ranjan, I'll let you introduce yourself, and then we can take it forward from there.
Yeah, short introduction.
Yes, please.
Thank you for having me, Jessica. My name is 𝗲𝗲𝗄𝗃𝗃. I am a professor. I teach at a private college called Westminster University in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I'm here visiting Denver to have this little chat with my ex-wife, Jessica.
So as we're doing this, what I will start off in saying is that we haven't had many of the conversations that we are about to have today. So this isn't something that we have pre-planned or practiced in any which way possible. And many of the perspectives that we share, we were two people in a relationship and we're going to have two different perspectives. And we've talked about this, that there might be some ways that I explain the relationship that might look different than Ranjan's way. And that's just because we're going to look at it through our own lens, right? So do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, it feels like a therapy in front of a camera for the first time. It's like going through a divorce counseling, maybe, something that we've never done.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is a topic that we've never really talked about. So yeah, I mean, I am a little nervous, but it's okay.
Yeah. And so let's get started. So Ranjan and I met in 2008. We met in 2008 and we had an arranged marriage. So literally before we even met each other, we knew that his uncle knew somebody that my father worked with, whatever. So the two of them said, oh, your daughter is looking for a guy to be married with, my son. So it was kind of more like a blind date, I would say, but going in knowing that you were going to marry this person, which, by the way, if you are not married, I don't recommend an arranged marriage. Do you?
Yeah, no, but I think it's also important to remind people that arranged marriage might sound like a very ancient thing, but in our part of the world, in Nepal, India, South Asia, it's still pretty prevalent. It might be kind of dying out among the younger generation, but it's still the more sort of normal way that people get married.
Yeah.
So that's how we ended up getting married as well.
And also I want to add that I do have some friends who've had very successful arranged marriages, and I would love to bring them on sometime too, because I think that's important to highlight also. But going into our relationship, I'll let you kind of give your story of how that happened.
Oh, our relationship. You mean before the marriage or
just
during
kind
the
of
marriage?
or
getting
the
to
arranged
know
marriage
each other?
setting. Yeah.
Yeah, so, I guess in my early 30s, it was time to get married, as was the norm. I looked around me. Everyone in my family had been in an arranged marriage. It wasn't out of the norm to think that I would also end up in a situation like that. So to cut it short, I mean, I don't want to drag, this on forever, but yeah, so we met at Jessica's house. I still remember the first time that we met. My uncle drove me there. Anyway, so the next thing we know, 2 days later, I fly back to Hawaii where I was getting my PhD. And for the most part, before we got engaged, our relationship just happened over the phone. Yeah. I mean, we barely knew each other. We barely spent any time with each other. Most of our getting to know each other happened over the phone. Yes. And then after 6 months or so, we got engaged and then we got married. And then Jessica moved to Hawaii and then it all started falling apart.
From my perspective, well, it fell apart a little before that, but from my perspective, I met him knowing I would get married to him. I saw him and I remember what I thought. What I thought at the time was, okay, his nose is a little big. I hope our kids don't have his nose, but he seems nice. That was literally what I thought.
And I thought Jessica was pretty. I still remember that. I probably wouldn't have gone, there's some things about her that I was, a lot of things about her at the time that I was attracted to, or I thought I was attracted to. But she definitely came across as someone who was smart and pretty,
Okay.
for sure.
And then, so for the 10 years that we were married, we had a pretty much sexless marriage, right? Where we didn't have a sexual relationship at all, pretty much. And even when we had our son, we planned on having our son. So we'll talk about that a little bit down the road. But talking about me first, I'll let myself explain my background, and then after that Ranjan can explain his background. But I was not a virgin when we got married, and I had told Ranjan about this very honestly. And when we did get married, it was very challenging for me, because obviously this was very different than what I'd ever experienced before.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think she brought up I was not a virgin because there are some expectations in arranged marriages in our part of the world for maybe the bride to be a virgin. To me, I didn't have those kinds of expectations. I was fine with that. But when we got into the marriage, I mean, we pretty much didn't have a sexual relationship. And yeah, it was tough. It was tough to get through the 9 years or 10 years that we were married. So as soon as we moved together and we were married, I realized that I wasn't interested in having sex with Jessica. I don't know. First of all, I would say, and this is just my perspective, and Jessica, might agree or disagree, and she'll have her own take on things. At the basis of it, I felt like there was an emotional disconnect between me and her. I saw her as a friend, someone I could get along with, but there was a complete lack of any kind of an emotional compatibility. On top of that, we were also going through different kinds of stress. It was a stressful situation. There was a financial stress. We didn't really know each other. It was like two strangers being forced into the situation that we were in. I was also deep into my doctoral studies. But having said all of that, there was maybe something in my biology or DNA that just did not make me crave sex anyway with her, with anyone else at the time, which led me to think that I was asexual. Yeah.
So from my perspective, what I'll say is we had a good relationship. We were good friends. Yes, we had fights in between, obviously, as any relationship does. But we could go out for dinner. We could go out for movies. We had, I think, fair to say, I was fully supportive of you doing your PhD. And I was, I was doing beyond I wasn't just sitting there, let's just put it that way. I was really working and providing for the family financially and doing everything from my perspective. So when we essentially did, when the only thing really missing in our relationship was sex. And for me, that was really hard because I knew what a normal sexual relationship was from before I'd gotten married. And I felt like something was amiss. And I would often ask him, are you gay? I would often ask you, hey, are you gay? What's wrong? What's up here? And he would say he wasn't gay. And I believed him. I absolutely believed him. But at the same time, there was something missing. I didn't know about the term asexuality. That was something that I just found I think I found a YouTube video that was recommended to me about asexuality. That's where I learned about the term. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to kind of start this relationship roundtable, because there are many things about relationships that people don't talk about openly. And I think those are conversations that need to be had openly. So I found the term asexuality from a YouTube video that was recommended to me. And then I went and found Asexuals Facebook group. And in that Facebook group, I just watched all of the conversations in there. I was a silent observer for a while. And I essentially, people were saying, I would rather do the dishes than have sex. I would rather, go out and do gardening instead of having sex. And I was like, okay, this sounds like what my husband could be. So I Googled the term asexual, I think, qualities of an asexual or something like that. And then I brought it to you and I said, is this you? right? Do you remember that?
Yeah,
Yeah. And
maybe.
what do you mean,
Yeah.
maybe? Like, that's because I don't think you knew of the term asexual
Yeah,
before
but
that.
that specific moment when you brought it to me, I don't remember it like that.
Okay.
But yeah.
Yeah.
I remember that you were the one who brought it up.
Yeah, so I was the one who and I said, "Is this you?" And he read it and he said, "Yeah, that is." So that is how we came across the term asexual, because it was literally the, like, a wife trying to figure out what was going on, because, and there were many times that, like, he didn't, like, he didn't hit me, he wasn't mean, he was nice. So there was everything else in our relationship worked out, and we were good friends. I think that translates into our friendship even till today, right? We could talk for hours. We can, like, get into political discussions and have very nice, respectful discussions, talk for hours. We were genuinely really good friends. And I think our values also really aligned, right? But at the same time, that, like, for me, the sex part not happening wasn't adding up, right? So that's kind of where we came to terms with an asexual relationship. And even after that, I don't think, like, we still tried to make it work. But I will say there were times in between where I was trying to figure things out. And I think this is the part that people don't often understand. They think it's all about sex. And of course, yeah, sex feels good. Like, if you're a normal, like, heterosexual person, then you crave sex and you seek it out. But what people don't understand is when you are in a sexless relationship, it is a very lonely feeling. And to be rejected again and again and again by your husband is just not fun. So pretty much for the 9 or 10 years that we were married, I was so sad I wouldn't look at myself in the mirror. I couldn't look into my eyes because I was so sad by being rejected again and again. And I didn't want anybody else because I just wanted to be with my husband. And there were times in between where I was trying to navigate things. And I remember there was a time when I joined 𝗲𝗵𝗶𝗀𝗀. So for those people who don't know, 𝗲𝗵𝗶𝗀𝗀 is a website where literally their slogan is, "Life is short, have an affair." And I joined 𝗲𝗵𝗶𝗀𝗀 just to figure out, like, is this normal? What is happening? Because I know he likes me as a person, we're good friends, but I'm really trying to figure out, like, where I am going wrong. And I felt like something was wrong with me. The best way I can describe it is I felt like a houseplant. And that was really hard at an emotional level. And, like, even, I would say that transpired even, like, when I got together with my now partner. That, like, rejection, it took a while for it to be able to really heal. So that's kind of my perspective. But I will add one more quick thing, is that when there would be times that I would, like, every few months or so, you remember we used to have huge blow-up fights? And I realize now in hindsight that I just wanted to feel some kind of connection, and we would have fights, and those fights were actually a way of us connecting. Because, when you have, like, a big blow-up fight, you're both very emotional. And when we had those fights, I actually felt more connected after the fight, because I saw, okay, he is willing to fight for me. He's willing to kind of fight this through and make this work through it with me. And that was literally the only form of connection that I truly felt, besides going for dinner sometimes and the movies. And when we would sit down and talk about politics, we always enjoyed talking about politics for hours. So, yeah.
Yeah. I actually hated those fights. It would really
Yeah.
drain me out.
Yeah.
I didn't enjoy those fights at all. And, I was going through my own kind of rejection and loneliness. It wasn't like I was sitting on some high chair.
No.
And, I think we were both embroiled in a very difficult situation that we struggled to navigate. Yeah, but there was, we still somehow managed to stay as friends.
Yeah, because I also think, like, I don't know, I've thought about this a lot. You tell me what you think. I also think, like, I think you have, like, the concept of inertia, right? Inertia of motion. Like, there needs to be something that breaks that inertia, right, of motion. Very sciencey, but yeah. And I think that's kind of what happened in our marriage also, because to break apart, it's not like, if you cheated or if I cheated or if I beat you up or something like that happened, I think it would be easier for us to be like, this is it, let's end it, let's go our separate ways. But in another way, it was kind of like, it wasn't bad enough to leave, but there was nothing really to hold on to either, which, saying it now, it feels so sad and we should have walked out earlier. But at that moment, it just like, and I, as modern as like I am, I have realized that I have some very, very conservative and very like traditional values that's been inculcated in me, and divorce just wasn't an option, Did you feel like that too?
Not really. I always felt like divorce would have been an option. But there were other situations, and that's a point I think that I'm trying to make, was the marriage had been embroiled in so many collateral factors.
Yes.
For example, you came on a spouse visa.
Yes.
So
Okay.
getting a divorce would have meant sending Jessica back to Nepal, or she would have, been forced to go back to Nepal. And I didn't want her to, be devoid of the opportunities that the United States would have for her, because I knew that she was always a very talented, capable person. So all of those things were embroiled, in the situation. And I think for me personally, I mean, it was 9 years of solid depression. I mean, dark depression that was very hard to get out of, because getting out was not easy. I mean, there are so many factors that were beyond our control.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. I think my visa status had a big part to do with it, because I came on as his dependent to America. And so us getting divorced would mean me having to go back. And also, I think one more element to layer to this is when we first met, that first meeting we had, I had very honestly and very blatantly told you, why do you want to marry a Nepali girl? Why do you want to have an arranged marriage? And he had said, well, I haven't met anybody so far. So, I was here in Nepal and I figured, why not? And that made sense to me at the time. But I had also told you, and I don't know if you remember this, but I had said, here's the thing. I drink, I smoke, and I'm not a virgin. And if you're looking for a pretty girl with you to take with you and be your maid, I'm the wrong number. I remember I told you that. And, and I was literally trying, my strategy at the time was to try to scare him away. And if that didn't scare him away, then, he's a decent person and we have a shot. And I will say, over time, as we lived together and got to know each other, just like, our relationship, like genuine friendship grew. And I think we genuinely started to like love each other as people, right? And so I had asked him if he had been in a relationship before, because I had, and my thinking wasn't that I would, end up with somebody who I believed was an asexual, but it was basically, I was scared of like this very stereotypical thinking that men often have in my part of the world, where, oh, you've been with other guys before, so you're damaged goods kind of thing. You're not a virgin. So I just wanted to kind of lay it out there that I wasn't a virgin, and I wanted to let him know that I'd been in a relationship before, and I only wanted to be with somebody who had been in a relationship before, because then, well, you did this in your past. Those discussions wouldn't come up. So I had asked you if you were in a relationship before, and you had said that you were in a relationship before, right? Which you hadn't been. So I guess he kind of felt like that wasn't a big deal, as what you told me later on.
To me, you having been in a relationship before was not a big deal.
Right.
And, drinking and things like that, it was just not a big deal at all. But there was, because I did grow up in a patriarchal society, and I'm not trying to, put the blame on others or point fingers elsewhere. But I think there was a part of me that felt like I needed to project some sort of masculinity, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think and I didn't think it was a big deal, but looking back, I can see how big of a big deal that would have been. But, that's just one of the things that I assumed would just take care of itself.
And I remember later on when we got married and obviously we were having these sexual problems, I was like, you told me you were in a relationship. Why didn't you tell me? And he said, well, I just thought we would just sit down and laugh about it one day. And at that time, obviously, I was so mad. But after having known him for what, like now 15 years that I've known you, I will tell you that like he does not have a vicious bone in his body. He's one of the nicest people that I know. So, you know, looking back, I absolutely believe that there wasn't really any malicious intent besides, okay, I mean, and who hasn't said a little lie to be able to get the girl, you know? So I think a number of these things played into it.
So, you know, so I didn't get into it with the thought of deceiving anyone. I mean, I thought like things would eventually fall into place.
Yeah.
But obviously, I guess like I didn't really know what I was getting into.
Yeah. And I've known him for 10 years, and I absolutely believe that at this point, because not 10 years, sorry, 15 years. Yeah, sorry. I've known him for 15 years. Wow, time flies. So I absolutely believe this because like over time we've gotten to know each other, right? And you know, our friendship has also evolved. So I'll just kind of leave it at that. So that was kind of the marriage. And I do have a question for you though. The like kind of like the idea that you had of like me wanting sex, and then you knowing that, you know, you didn't want to
Yeah,
like
it broke me. It was really it was frustrating, and I think of myself as a pretty sensitive person,
Which
so
he
I
is.
wasn't detached from it emotionally, you know. And yeah, so that was a very heartbreaking kind of a situation.
Yeah, because
which pulled me further away.
yeah, and it's pulled him further away, and we didn't
And
know.
I also remember us going to a marriage counselor once, which was a disaster, because this is why context is so important. And the counselor had no, you know, and I don't blame him, but he had no any understanding of an arranged marriage or South Asian culture or anything like that. And he just went by the
Remember
books
he
in
said-
terms of
Yeah, I
dance.
don't know. First of all, I don't know on why he didn't like bring up the terms of asexuality and this and that, because we had gone to a marriage counselor pretty early on into our marriage, maybe like 3 months or so into it, 4 months or so into it. And he didn't kind of say, hey, why don't you look at these different sexual orientations and maybe you would identify as one of these, because I think that would have clarified a lot of confusion for us. But I still remember what he said. Do you remember? He was like, why don't you just dance? And we looked at each other and we were like, dance? He was like, yeah, just dance. You remember that?
Yeah, I think for him, like the thought was, you know, when people dance, they have some sort of a physical rhythm together and intimacy, and then one thing leads to another. But he was so devoid of any understanding of
Yes.
context. I mean, you know, that's a lesson to be had for all of us, which is that therapy and counseling can be a great thing, but if you end up with a bad therapist, it can make things even worse. So
And to be fair, from that lesson I've learned, so like obviously I've had counseling beyond that after that, and I always try to find somebody who has either a full context of international relationships or like a South Asian perspective, just to be able to understand the different nuances, even like, you know, from a family context, relationship context, because I have realized that that is an important piece when you do seek out a counselor. So anyways, so yeah, that was funny. The whole counselor thing, I'd kind of forgotten about that. It was funny. But moving on, so we had that, and at a certain point, I just want to kind of share a few of my experiences as we go through that. So as I said, I joined 𝗲𝗲𝗄𝗏 at one point because I was just trying to figure out what I was feeling, what was going on, because we were two very confused people who, and you know, to be fair, like, this isn't something that you can just phone a friend or an aunt and talk about. Like, hey, me and my husband have been together for like, you know, 7, 8, 10 years, and we've never really had sex. Like, this is not something that people can talk about. And I genuinely cared about him as a person, and I didn't want to put him in a light where he looked, you know, like where he looked bad, because I genuinely didn't know what was wrong. So it was a very confusing period. So the next thing I did was go on 𝗲𝗲𝗄𝗏, and I put on like a fake mask and stuff like that they have that you can go on. And I talk to guys, and you can send your picture. I think they can unlock a key, send your picture, and I would send my picture fully clothed. Don't even go there. But they would basically say, wow, you're beautiful, you're hot, like, you know, I would love to be with you. And I was like, okay, so I'm normal. Like, there are guys out there who want me, but my husband doesn't. I would have guys, like, you know, men walk up to me all the time and ask me out, and neither of us wore rings ever, so people didn't know we were married. But I would have men approach me all the time, and I would be like, no, thank you. But there was something obviously missing here in our relationship. And I don't know, because everything else worked out with us really well and we were good friends. All that I wanted was this just one simple missing link to be put in place, you know? And I thought, well, maybe because of his PhD stress, after he's over that, maybe we'll have like a good, healthy relationship. Maybe this, maybe that, you know? And going through all of these, all of a sudden, my older brother passed away. He committed suicide. So that was very traumatic for me. And I didn't know how I would survive because I was on a dependent visa. I couldn't work legally and was married in a marriage that was pretty much non-existent. And my older brother, who was literally like the closest person that I was ever in my life, committed suicide. So that all my world shattered and I didn't know what to do. And I sat and I thought about it. And at that time, we'd already had a few candid conversations about us maybe someday divorcing if it didn't work out. So that if was always on the table, right? If it doesn't work out, if we get divorced, we always kind of had these open, candid conversations in that way. And
I just want to add that your
please.
brother passing away had a huge impact on me as well, because he lived with us for a year before he passed away. So so I wasn't, I mean, of course he was your brother, so you would have a very different relationship with him, but I wasn't removed from that situation either.
Yeah, and I'm not saying you were removed, but I'm more going towards the fact that after my brother passed away, I was completely devastated, and I just didn't feel like I had anything to live for. So that's when I wanted to have a child. Because, and honestly, this sounds so dumb, it worked out great over time, but at the time I'd gone to this like one sister of mine, Nepali sister, shout out to 𝗿𝗵𝗶𝗀𝗲, she's amazing. But I went to her and I said, don't have money to go to a doctor, didn't have health insurance, I was on a dependent visa, he was on a PhD getting his stipend. And I went to her and I said, I need something to get through this. I don't know what, like we don't have money for counseling or anything. And she said, get pregnant, because if you're pregnant, apparently your hormone produces something. And 𝗿𝗵𝗃 didn't know, like the sister didn't know the relationship that we were in. But she said, if you become pregnant, your hormone kind of produces some, like body produces hormones that basically pulls many women out of depression. Not everybody, but it can definitely have an effect. So for me, it was like something to look forward to in a situation where everything seemed like a dead end in the moment, like having a child, and then also like something to help me get over the depression that I was going through with my brother's death. And it made sense. And another way that I looked at it was I always knew I was very ambitious. I always knew that once I had my paperwork in place, I would go out and essentially like, you know, go into the career world. So I just told myself, okay, I know he's a good person, because by this time we'd lived together enough, we'd been together for 4 years, we'd been married for 4 years, that I knew that he was a good person. And I knew that he genuinely cared about me, and I knew he wouldn't screw me over on purpose. So I walked up to you and I said, let's have a child. I said, what do you have to lose? You're probably not going to have a child with anybody else. And I have a biological clock. I understood that as a woman. And I didn't want to be in a place where I basically was 37, 38 years old and desperate to meet the next man to have a child with, right? So I just thought, let's have a child, and then we'll kind of take it from there. And I brought the idea to you. And
and I wanted to have a child too.
So we agreed.
I wanted a child really badly.
And we basically had, like, we always knew that there was a good chance we could get divorced. So we had already thought of the terms and conditions of how we would raise our child if we got divorced, right? How we would raise our child if we got divorced before we conceived. And this is kind of like, so we discussed how we're going to handle this if we get divorced, and like if we stay together, and let's have a child. So that's how we went ahead and had our child, which I think is one of the best things we did. Yeah. So he's so sweet. But anyways, but yeah, so that's kind of how we decided to have a child. And this is often a question that comes up, is if like, you guys didn't have a sexual relationship, how are you able to conceive? And you kind of give your version, I'll give my version after that of what I believe, and then we can take it from there.
No, you can start.
Okay, so from the research I've done, right? And I am not him, I don't know. We're just speculating at this point, and honestly don't care to know because it doesn't even matter anymore. But from what I know is, as an asexual person, you might not have interest in sex like for fun like a normal person does, but you can still have a desire to procreate. And that can still be kind of like a natural sexual relationship in that way, because you have a natural desire to procreate. That's my philosophy of at least how we were able to conceive our son. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I always wanted to have a child, and there was a deep desire in me to procreate, and there was, I don't know if this is the right word, but there was a deep arousal in me. So it just happened. There's no like deep thinking behind it.
Yes. And I mean, I think we come to the part now of finally at a certain point, how old was our son when we decided to get divorced? 3 years old?
Yeah,
he was 3 years old. So around when Tenzing, our son, was 3 years old, we decided to get divorced. And it was a very amicable decision. Both of us decided to get divorced. And then I had essentially gone to like a divorce support group. But what I didn't realize at the time is that the divorce support group, there were a few lawyers there who were also looking for clients. And I talked to a lawyer there and said, hey, this is my situation, looking to get divorced. What do you think? I was very overwhelmed. I hadn't told anyone in my life that we were getting divorced yet. And this lawyer was, she basically did what, lawyers did. And I think there's a great place to be able to hire lawyers where you do have a difficult relationship to navigate through and a difficult partner to navigate through the divorce. But she basically was like, oh, we can do this to him, that to him, we can get this from him. And I just remember being like, but what about our son and what he would have to go through if I kind of went this route of like hiring a shark lawyer like that and just kind of, ruining you, I guess, in a way. So that was when I came to you and I said, let's not hire a lawyer. Let's not do anything. Let's just sit down and figure out a divorce plan. And we didn't hire any third person. We sat down together, mediated a divorce plan for ourselves, mediated like the custody, everything between ourselves. And I have to say, we're very proud of the fact like we handled it. We sat next to each other. We filed for divorce. The entire divorce process was done under $300. And that too, I think there was like this class we needed to take because we both, in Utah, the state where we got divorced, if you have children and you're getting divorced, there's this mandatory class you need to take. So we took that class and the divorce. So everything that we paid was literally what needed to be paid. Our divorce was done under $300. And I've seen many friends' divorces after that. And literally their bills can amount to like $60,000, $30,000. I know somebody who's amounted to $250,000, $300,000 per person for the divorce. And, like I've heard this saying that when you get divorced, it is nobody that wins. Like it's not the ex-husband or the ex-wife or the children. It's literally only the divorce lawyers that win and everybody in that process. And that's at least my perspective. I think we did that really well. How do you feel?
Yeah, it was a very simple process. Minimal paperwork, no lawyers. And, both of us wanted the same thing. Both of us had the same goal. And we were also very mindful of our son.
Yeah.
I think we put him at the center of, we didn't want him to suffer whatever decisions that we've taken in our lives. And I think we always prioritized our son,
We have.
and even today, even though we're divorced and we live in two different states, I don't think our son has had quite the negative impact that most kids might in a situation like this. I mean,
Can I tell you a story related
yeah.
to this? So I took Tenzing out once. This was when he was like still pretty young, maybe 6-7 years old. He's 11 years old now, about to be 12. And somebody asked him what his name is, and he said 𝗃𝗵𝗶𝗀𝗃𝗃. And then the little girl asked me what my name is, and I said my name is 𝗃𝗂𝗃𝗄𝗧. And then she turned to my son and she said, "You lied. That's not your last name. It's different from your mom's." And he said, "Yeah, because my parents are divorced." And then the little girl said, "Oh, that's so sad." And then Tenzing said, "No, it's not. My parents are best friends."
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was sweet. And even till now, like, he is so okay with our divorce, and we joke all the time, and we have a really good relationship.
It's been normalized for him.
Yeah.
I don't want to assume
Yeah,
that everything is fine in
Yeah.
him too. He's a kid, and he obviously being 11 years old, and even before being 7-8 years old, it would have been hard for him to fully articulate his emotions. But this is the only situation that he knows. So for him, it's a normal situation. I would say that the reason why it makes him good for him is because we don't fight. He's seen his parents get along, and our living situation is also not filled with conflict and friction. So, for the most part, it's worked out pretty well.
Yeah, and even from before, when we lived in the same house and we weren't divorced, if Ranjan needed to discipline Tenzing, I stayed out of it completely. And if I needed to discipline him, he stayed out of it completely. Even sometimes when, I knew, let's just give an example, like let's say when you were scolding Tenzing and I knew that he wasn't at his fault, I wouldn't say anything in front, but I would kind of say it on the side. I would say, "Hey, can I talk to you?" And then I'd say, "Oh, actually, this is what had happened. It wasn't his fault." Then I would let him go back and kind of make that right. And the same thing with me, if let's say I was letting Tenzing watch a little bit too much TV or something like that, you would pull me aside and talk to me without saying anything in front of him. So I think we still have that. So I met my now partner, and then I moved to Colorado, which thank you so much for letting me move with our son to Colorado and allowing that relationship to still me to like move on with my life. But what I will say is that even now, when there's anything that happens that needs, for our parents to talk to Tenzing, to both of us I will call him, and both of us will sit him down and talk to him virtually, in person. And the same thing when he's with you and he does something or something happens, you call me and both of us sit down and kind of handle that together.
I mean, yeah, we try to be the best co-parents that we can. It all comes down to communication. I think if there's strong communication, even disagreement is fine. I mean, humans will disagree, about a lot of things. But if two people can communicate in a mature and adult way, and if they have shared goals, eventually, things will work out. And yeah, so we haven't had like a major conflict or anything since the divorce. And I think we've done a pretty good job raising Tenzing in a healthy environment. And I think it's also good for a child to be exposed to different relationships in different situations, so that hopefully that'll make him open-minded about diversity and things like that in human relationships.
Yeah. And I think this is his normal, right? So you're right. I don't want to talk too much on him. Maybe someday when he grows up, I'll bring him on this podcast, and then he can
and then he'll
roast
vent.
us both.
Yes, that could happen too.
Yeah.
But
I think, maybe someday, Tenzing, in the future, you can come join this podcast and then completely roast your dad and me. But beyond that, so that was kind of the divorce process. Do you have anything to add about the divorce process and how we've navigated through it, and co-parenting or anything else like that?
No.
I have one more thing to add. So one more thing I do want to add is when we decided to conceive Tenzing, right? Obviously, I had anger in me for things, in the relationship, different things that hadn't worked out. And then I'm sure you had issues also. But we sat down and we basically talked and we said, if we're going to move forward and have a child, I don't get to bring up anything anymore and say, you did this and you did that. I decided to have this child with him, knowing everything that we do know about this relationship. And one thing that I don't have the right to do is, say anything about somebody's father, about somebody's mother, about anybody. So I kind of decided to move forward with a clean slate if we were going to move forward with having a child. And I think that was kind of the first pillar for us to be able to start building a healthy relationship, because Tenzing, I think, actually saved our relationship in that way.
Yeah, if Tenzing hadn't come into this world, you and I would not have any. There would have been no reason for us to remain friends, and eventually our relationship or friendship, whatever you might call it, would fizzle out. So Tenzing has been an anchor, and in a way, I think both of us still think about the three of us as some sort of a family, even though we don't physically live together. But we talk on the phone together all the time, and even when we are together, Tenzing visits me over a few times a year and quite often. But we always seem to be having a three-way communication, either over the phone or just
to see you. And I feel the same way about you. No matter what, we'll always be family. And I think that's kind of another takeaway I wanted to touch on is when we got divorced, there were times that, especially being from a South Asian background, it is always the woman's fault when people get divorced because, it is always the woman's fault. That's just how it goes. And there were many times throughout the divorce course, because people didn't know why we got divorced and they didn't understand. Obviously, we weren't going to go and talk about our sex lives with our parents and aunts and whoever. And there were a lot of, people trying to take sides between us. And you stood up for me many times and said, no, we decided to do this together. Whereas it would have been very easy for him to throw me under the bus and be like, well, I can't deal with her, so we're getting divorced. And he never did that. He always stood by my side, and he always, advocated for me and basically said that we decided to get divorced and it's not her fault. It's not my fault. We decided to get divorced. And there were sometimes people who tried to email you and say things and stuff like that, saying, oh, Jessica said you guys are getting divorced, and you would nicely reply and say, yes, we are getting divorced, and this is there is nothing spicy over here. We're getting divorced, but it's very boring. It's very simple. And
yeah, we try to keep it as simple as possible. And every family, every relationship, every situation has their own issues, and it's wrong. It's very hard. It shouldn't be that people sitting on the outside make all kinds of assumptions and judgments about people's relationships, because you never know what's actually going on. So like you said, in our culture, Nepali culture, and by the way, I don't want to overgeneralize Nepali culture or South Asian culture, because Nepal is also a pretty diverse country, but predominantly it's always the woman's fault, and I didn't want it to be that. So I was very kind of I guess ethically conscientious, or tried to be, in terms of this not being her fault or my fault. It was just a situation that we found ourselves in, and the best way would be to move ahead as positively as.
And I will add that I will never forget how protected I felt by you through the divorce process. I felt very protected and I felt very supported by you through the divorce process, which is really ironic to say, but it's really true, because if he had just wanted to throw me under the bus, it would have been so easy for him to do that. And that's one of the reasons why I decided to have a child with him, because by that time I knew he was a good person. And throughout the divorce, and even after that, many times, he has stood by me as a true friend, and I think I've done the same.
Yeah,
for
you've stood by me as well.
Yeah.
So I want to make that very clear. But also, I think this comes down to how much emphasis we want to put on society's perception. You know, for me, society has never been that important. I mean, it's important in different ways and different contexts, and maybe being a man, it's maybe easier for me to have that sort of detachment. But to me, it was always about us having a healthy relationship so that moving forward would be easy, but also very, very much so for 𝗀𝗵𝗃. And so what society, quote unquote, thought of us was the least of my priorities.
Me too. I think our biggest priority was our son, and also just the fact that we had a healthy relationship moving forward to be able to co-parent. And since that time, we've helped each other in so many different ways, which we're not even going to go into here. But he's helped me in so many ways. I've helped him in so many ways. And we've really, I think, like, you know, when you go through anything ugly, it's easy to keep on pulling each other down. But we've actually lifted each other up and pulled each other up as we've moved forward. Like an example of that is when I was dating, right? I would sometimes, you know, like you're in the process of dating, you get ghosted sometimes, or sometimes a relationship that you thought would work out doesn't work out. And I would cry, and, you know, you would take me out for lunch, and you would be like, come, let me take you out for lunch. And you would take me out for lunch, and you would make me feel better. And you'd be like, I still remember what you said. You said, Jessica, you are a catch. You'll find somebody. Don't worry. I was like, okay, if my ex-husband says that, then I have hope, you know? And we kind of moved forward. And even when I met my now partner, we were in a long distance relationship, and he was so supportive of me taking our son and moving to a different state. And I have been really good, I think, in terms of, like, you know, sending 𝗀𝗵𝗃, being able to keep that relationship and really being able to divide our time together despite the geographical constraints.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add?
No, I
No.
think I've said
Okay.
it all.
So at conclusion,
I just want to, if
Yeah.
we're concluding, I just want to add that I don't necessarily identify myself as asexual anymore. So I had an interesting conversation with the writer 𝗿𝗲𝗄𝗃, who's actually written a book about being ace, and
do you remember what the title of the book is?
Yeah, I think it's just ace.
Ace? Okay.
Yeah.
And I'll link the book in the description below, but go ahead.
And you know, she talks about how it's a spectrum, and sexual identity is fluid, and people change with their experiences. So,
Right.
you know, I'm in the process right now of exploring new relationships as well. So I think that's important to
Yeah.
bring up.
And in the process of building, like being in, you know, finding a relationship for yourself, I will say that, like, the way you've supported me, I absolutely support you in any which way. And whatever, I only wish the best for you, you know? Do you want to say any last goodbyes?
No, thank you for the opportunity to talk.
Yeah. That
Yeah,
you
what
can
do
be
you think?
divorced.
What do you think should be the takeaway?
I think you can be divorced and still, like, you know, not hate each other. And I understand there's different kinds of people you get divorced with, and not everybody thing can end like in a nice and dandy way. But I think the biggest thing is also just, if you are somebody who is watching somebody else get divorced, know that they might not be ending things in a horrible way. So you don't have to pick sides, you know? You can kind of be a neutral party to both people and support both people through the divorce.
Yeah, human beings are complex. Human relationships are complex. And, you know, instead of like reducing things to simple things and simple labels,
Yeah.
I think it's really like a great thing to be open-minded to different experiences. in
Yeah,
life.
like
Yeah.
we're divorced, but you will always be family to me. I will always care about you, and I know
Yeah.
you feel the same way about me. So with that, thank you so much for stopping by and listening to this conversation. We will look forward to having more such conversations at the Relationship Roundtable. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.